Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Ben, and today we're going to be looking at the Jamstik MIDI guitars. Let's go. Now before this video starts, it is not lost on me at all that, of course, in the middle of editing this, Jamstik announces that they've got 2 new models coming out, and I'm guessing they're going to phase out the Jamstik Classic. Maybe not, but I've already gone this far, so I'm going to put this video out there anyway, and I'm sure you'll be able to find these on the used market regardless. That being said, both the new models that they're coming out with feature more or less some of the same pickups, which would be these KD Rising Sun pickups, as well as the exact same electronics underneath the hood that do the MIDI processing. All right, let's get on with the video. Now on my left here is the Jamstik Classic, which was released in May of 2023. And on my right here is the Jamstik Studio, which was actually released a few years ago in 2020. Now, if you don't know anything about Jamstik or its parent company Zivix, they were born out of the Guitar Hero era. And if you're not familiar with Guitar Hero, it was a series of video games where you were given a guitar-shaped controller that had different buttons on it, and you would have to press these buttons to basically match what was playing on the video game in front of you to successfully complete your song or win against your opponent or whatever you were doing at the time with it. Now Zivix saw this and thought, hey, we could make some guitar-shaped controllers and release those as musical instruments, essentially. And the idea of a MIDI guitar is not entirely new. They've been around for 40 plus years now at this point. But the price point was something that was very appealing about the Zivix Jamstik. And so they released this Jamstik, which was like a 5-fret practice guitar, and it would plug up with your apps or GarageBand, and it was specifically tied to your Apple instruments or Apple computers or phones. Now, sometime later in 2016, Jamstik Plus was released, which was more of a Bluetooth offering of the original 5-fret Jamstik, and they were able to incorporate cross-platform into this, so it would work with both your Android as well as your Macs. Now when we fast forward a few more years into their development, and that's where the Jamstik Studio comes along in 2020. And this is not just a MIDI instrument, but this actually functions as a full-fledged guitar with humbuckers, a 1/4-inch jack, which is able to plug into an amp or your DAW. And a few years after that, they released the Classic guitar, which you can see has more of a traditional classic design, but still maintains the functionality of not just being an electric guitar, but also a MIDI controller as well. Now, I have acquired both of these guitars on my own. I have paid for them myself. This is not a sponsored video, and the information I'm about to give you is stuff that I have found myself, researched myself, or come to the conclusion of myself as well. I just want to get that out there before we begin. Now, right out of the gate, let's get into the price. The Classic retails for about $9.99 and the Studio retails for about $7.99. Now, in complete disclosure, this is a refurbished model that I was able to get on a Black Friday sale from the actual manufacturer for about $674. And this was on a overstock price for $6.99. And I'm guessing that's because it was pink, as it was the only one that was on the overstock price. And that was from a different website altogether. Now, both of these guitars do come with a gig bag as well. The one that belongs to the Classic here fully opens like a clamshell, and inside you can see a nice padded neck rest. Flip it over and you can see there's also 2 padded backpack style straps. Back on the front side, there's a fully functional pocket embroidered with the Jamstik name. In the pocket, the case candy, which consists of the Jamstik user manual, a sunglasses style sleeve which contains inside a 3.5mm to 5-pin DIN MIDI cable adapter, a truss rod and bridge adjustment wrench set, a special Jamstik USB-A to USB-C cable, 2 1mm guitar picks, and a USB-A to USB-C adapter. For the Studio model, you get more or less the same thing, just tinier, as well as some more specialized tools for this guitar's unique design. A padded sleeve-style case. On the back side, you get some basic unpadded shoulder straps. Back on the front side, you get your embroidered sleeve pocket containing the Studio manual, the USB-A to USB-C cable, a special T-wrench for adjusting the truss rod. The sunglasses style fabric sleeve contains a bundle of hex wrenches, a set of strap locks, the 3.5mm to 5-pin DIN MIDI cable adapter, those two 1mm picks, and once again, the USB-A to USB-C adapter. And similar to these two guitars themselves, you can also see the size difference in these cases. And lastly, you'll notice the horizontal handle on the Classic model's case is foam padded, whereas the Studio's model is a woven thin fabric. Now when it comes to the Classic, I think the first thing anybody's going to notice is that, yes, it looks like a Fender Strat. Now beyond that, I think one of the first things that anybody's going to notice, or at least myself, is going to be one of two things. Either this black pickup here, which is the MIDI pickup, or the fact that there's no jack here like there would be on a normal Stratocaster. Other than that, this guitar is a design that we've been pretty familiar with for about 70 years now. It's a classic design, as the name implies. The finish is also available in onyx black, a cream antique white, and baby blue. This is a sunburst version. When it comes to the Studio, this is a design all on its own, really. And the first thing anybody's going to notice, of course, is that there is no headstock. Now, the next thing that I noticed was that there was only one control knob, meaning that there was probably no tone controls. Now, it turns out the design of this guitar is actually not as unique as I would have thought. It's actually made in conjunction with an American importer named Alp or ALP Guitars, which is also, I think, tied to a Chinese manufacturer known as Alp, who specializes in headless basses and guitars. They say on the ALP website that they are working in conjunction with Zivix to produce a Studio MIDI guitar. So that is obviously information that is old now as this has come out. You can look at their guitars. They have one called the Alp Leaf, which is nearly identical to this guitar, but without the MIDI implementation, and it actually does have a volume and tone knob. Interesting, huh? This design is available in several finishes, of course. All of them are matte. You've got the pink, you've got the black, white, blue, orange, and lastly, mint. Now weighing these guitars, the Jamstik Classic comes in just over 8 at 8.1 pounds, and the Jamstik Studio comes in just under 6 at 5.95 pounds. Now the body of the Classic is made out of alder, and the body of the Studio is actually made out of mahogany. Now one of the things that I do like about this guitar is this is the actual wood grain that you are seeing on top. I had thought maybe it was going to be a veneer just from looking at photos of it online. It sort of pops a little too strongly, kind of like guitars with the veneers where it's so overpronounced that it doesn't look real anymore. But no, this is the actual grain itself. Now one of the things that I noticed about the body after setting it in my lap and playing it for a little bit is that even though it looks like a Strat, you should actually think of these angles as more matching like a Telecaster. It's a sharper angle, it's not as rounded or beveled. Now this is an actual Telecaster, and you can see it's actually very similar in how these angles are. They're a lot more, I don't know, brutal, a lot rougher. Whereas a Strat tends to have softer angles. If you have a Strat, you'll know what I'm talking about because the body angle's got a little bit more of a rollover to it than the abrupt angles that are on a Telecaster. There is a belly carve on the backside, which is nice, just like a Strat, and it's not too bad sitting in your lap. Feels pretty good. Now talking about the Studio, as mentioned earlier, the body is made out of mahogany. It does also have a belly carve, and the body itself is not nearly as thick as the Classic model. Now when it's sitting in your lap, it does feel pretty comfortable. It does feel like one of those traveler guitars though, if you know what I mean, where it's just a little bit lower in your lap because there's just clearly not enough body up here to get it where you're used to playing. But overall, I'd say it's pretty comfortable still. Both of these guitars have maple necks. You can see here that the Classics is a roasted maple and it's a plain maple on the Studio. Now when we flip it around here, you can see though that the Studio does have a rosewood fretboard, whereas the Classic maintains the roasted maple fretboard. Both these guitars also have what I would consider our medium jumbo frets based on my measurements. The Classic has 22 frets, just like a Strat, and the Studio has 24 frets. Both guitars are a 25.5-inch scale, or roughly around that. Now regarding the neck measurements, the nut on the Classic comes in at 1.65 inches. The first fret measures in at 0.8 inches, and the 12th fret being 0.91 inches. Now moving on to the Studio, you can't really get an accurate idea of what the nut measures because it's kind of enclosed in this metal block here at the end of the neck. However, I was able to measure the string spacing on the Studio, and it's perfectly identical to the Classic, which comes in at about 37 millimeters from string edge to string edge of the E strings. Now, if we measure the first fret here, we actually get a 0.79 inch, and when we move down to the 12th fret, we get a 0.91 inches. So spec-wise, these guitars are nearly identical in both width and fret thickness. Now, when it comes to the radius of the fretboards themselves, I have found the Jamstik website to be a little bit misleading. The specs online say the Classic is 12-inch radius, but I was reading closer to a 15-inch radius with the tools that I have. Now, when it comes to the Studio, the information online says it's a 13.78-inch radius or 250 millimeter inch radius. Now, doing some basic math, a 250 millimeter radius is actually a bit closer to the 9.5-inch radius found on Fender guitars. However, this didn't match any of those. I actually got closer to a 15-inch radius for the fretboard on this as well. So really, these necks are pretty close to identical, with the only difference being that you have 2 extra frets on the Studio model. Now, when it comes to hardware on the Classic, you've got a basic Strat style set of features. However, the most obvious difference being that there's no tremolo system, and that's no doubt because of the MIDI pickup and the way that it receives its data. What you do have here is actually more akin to like a modern Tele ashtray style, with the 6 different saddles here to adjust intonation, string height, string angle, that sort of thing. Now, if we move up the strings here, we've got our medium jumbo frets, as mentioned before. And on the backside, you've got 6 locking tuners, which is actually kind of nice. And then, of course, you've got a couple string trees up there to round things off nicely. Now, moving on to the Studio, it's quite a bit different than I've seen on other headless guitars. So let's just start on this end. You would feed all 6 of your strings through those 6 channels there, where you'll soon hit the string locks. Then we follow our strings down the neck here and into this block here down at the bottom, which functions as our bridge, our tuner, our string lock, winders. It's got a multi-function purpose. Tuning this is not as much of a pain in the butt as I had thought it was going to be. Real quick run through, you would run your strings down this channel till they're about 1 inch past the bridge here, and then you would pre-cut them. Then you would pull them back, and you feed the strings into a hole on these. When these knobs turn, these wheels inside rotate. And with that extra inch of string, you just basically keep turning it until it eventually tensions up. It's not as complicated as I had thought it would be, but it's not as familiar as the Classic or any other normal guitar. When it comes to the tuning ratio, the Classic sits at 18:1 tuners, which is pretty nice, and I can't tell you what the Studio's at because it was difficult to measure that. There's a lot going on down here. Regarding the strap buttons of these 2 guitars, the Classic has what's a more familiar flower pot design, kind of like what you would find on an Epiphone, and the Studio has a Schaller sort of design with a different sort of button on it. So if you want to use strap locks for this, thankfully it comes with some, which will work for this guitar only. Other hardware on these 2 guitars, the backside of the Classic has a plate much like a Strat for the bolt-on neck, and the neck is bolted straight to the body on the Studio. Both of these guitars have KD pickups. KD pickups are made by KD Rising Guitar, a Chinese manufacturer of all sorts of guitar accessories, from tuners and strap buttons and pickups, knobs, push button pots, everything in between. And their client list goes from $25 Amazon guitars to much more expensive guitars from very well-known manufacturers here in the States or abroad. Now, I don't have the specific information on these pickups other than the fact that they're KD pickups. Through a little bit of research, I believe that the humbuckers on both these guitars are KDP 3002 pickups, or some variant thereof made specifically for the Jamstik. These are both ceramic-based humbuckers. Now, the single coil pickups on the Classic are also ceramic, and I think they're KDP 1004 pickups. In regards to the readings I'm getting for these pickups, for the Classic, I get an 8.98 k ohms for the bridge humbucker, 6.30 k ohms for the middle position, and 6.39 k ohms for the neck. For the bridge and the middle split, I get a 3.73 k ohms, and the middle and neck split, I get a 3.29 k ohms. Regarding the Jamstik Studio, well, I'll just say that you learn things when you do tests like this. Now, this guitar is touted as having a coil split option, and For sure, you can see that the pot there does have a split push-pull system in it. Now, based on my testing and my own ears, I believe when you pull the pot for the Jamstik Studio, the bridge is whole and not split. Now, this is where things get a little weird because you might be thinking, oh, well, they've just reversed that connection. I think there's something else going on here because if I were to then flip the selector to the neck position, I believe the neck actually is split now. And the reverse would be true if I were to then press the pot down. I believe the neck is now whole, but if I flip back to the bridge, that is now split. So the wiring is somehow flipped in there some way. And what that basically means is there's no selection where you can have either the full raw power of both humbuckers playing at once or both coils split. Now, I don't know if that is just a manufacturing error unique to this specific Jamstik Studio or if this is some sort of manufacturing bust on every single Jamstik Studio. So if you have one of these and you have the ability to take some readings, I'm curious if they match what I'm getting here. And speaking of that, let's start with the push-pull knob down, and we'll start at the bridge. So the bridge, I'm reading a 3.79 k ohms, and the neck reads a 6.83. However, if I pull the knob, the bridge now reads 7.54, or much closer to a complete humbucker. And if I flip to the neck, now I'm reading a 3.45 k ohms. Now, I've measured a few coil splitting pickups in my time, and I've never seen the k ohms go up when the coil was split. Now, when we go to the middle position with the knob down, which I believe is the bridge split and the neck whole, we're reading a 2.45 k ohms. Now, if I were to pull the knob, which now I believe is the bridge whole and the neck split, I'm reading a 2.38 k ohms. So I don't know if you'd consider that a downside or not, but that's just what my ears and what my electronics are telling me about this guitar in particular. Now, switching back to the Classic, the pots here are 500K pots. Switch is nothing special. I couldn't find any information on it. When it comes to the push-pull pot on the Studio, there's only one push-pull pot that is on the KD Rising Guitar website, and you can actually buy this bridge on KD Rising Guitar, you can buy this bridge on KD Rising Guitar, you can buy these tuners on KD Rising Guitar. I have a feeling almost everything on these guitars is from KD Rising Guitar. So that being said, the only push-pull pot that is on their website is available in 250K or 500K variants, and I'd like to think since these are humbuckers, it's probably a 500K, but I don't have concrete proof of that. And lastly, for electronics, we've got the little black bar down there at the bridges. Now that is our hexaphonic MIDI pickup. That ties into our MIDI jacks here on the underside. When it comes to other materials on these guitars, the Classic has a white, black, white 3-ply pickguard, which houses all 4 pickups, the 3 guitar pickups and the 1 hexaphonic MIDI pickup. You've got 3 knobs here, a volume and 2 tones. The volume controls all 3 pickups, and the 2 tone knobs are wired, 1 each for the 2 single coil pickups. The pickup selector has a white cap on top. Moving on to the neck, you've got black inlays, plastic. Now regarding the Studio, you've got black pickup rings, you've got a black volume knob here, as well as a black knob for your pickup selector. The neck itself has white plastic inlays going all the way down to the 24th fret. Now up here at the very end, which looks like it might house like an infrared sensor or something back there, is actually a little tray that comes out, and they call this your pick holder. Behind the pick holder there is your truss rod, which is why you need that long T handle to adjust it. Also down here by the bridge, I don't know if you can see this little black dealio that's popping out right there. That's actually your crank to adjust your bridge. So it's magnetic, it sticks in there. You can see it just wants to be there, that's its home. Stick it in and you crank. When we flip both of these guitars to the back side, they've got an identical back plate. Now speaking of other materials, let's talk about that 1mm guitar pick that we mentioned earlier. Now what that's used for is actually adjusting the height of your hexaphonic pickup. What you would do is put your guitar on the bench, and you would raise and lower the hexaphonic pickup using these little tiny screw holes here until that guitar pick fits just in there between the strings and the surface of the pickup. I think that's actually a clever design to give you a guitar pick as a measurement device, and you could still use it as a regular guitar pick if you're a monster. Now I'm going to get into the sound test of just the guitar pickups right now. I will do a neck dive test on both of these guitars, and I doubt you'll see any on the Studio, seeing as the top half of the neck is not there. Now real quick, MIDI functionality wise, both these guitars have the exact same electronics in them, and the reason I'm telling you that now, it will be just this guitar, but everything is the same. It won't matter what guitar I use because the instrument is really just this black bar. So I want to point out a few things here. Ideally, you want to have 1 millimeter between the string and the hexaphonic pickup, as mentioned earlier. Well, in this case, I can get that for the outer E strings, but the inside is a lot closer because there's no way to adjust the arc on the hexaphonic pickup. Now secondly, the Jamstik comes with a USB adapter, and that USB adapter is proprietary to the Jamstik guitars. So the Jamstik software, while very helpful, will not interact with the guitar if you use another USB-C to USB-C cable. So make sure you don't lose that. The Jamstik also throws in a 5-pin MIDI connector to 1/8" adapter, and that plugs in here at the bottom where you can see that little tiny plug there. Now I mention this because that is a Type A adapter, and they don't tell you that anywhere on the website, they don't tell you that in the user manual, but they also sell Type B adapters, which are identical looking. And if you were to, say, lose the adapter they gave you and buy a replacement, if you bought a B, it wouldn't work. It's basically like it reverses some of the pins, and the information that would be coming out of this pickup would just be gobbledygook. Now one thing I really like about the Jamstik is it does output the audio from the pickups as well as the data from the hexaphonic pickup to the whatever MIDI device you have it plugged into. And that's a great demonstration tool for what I'm going to show you next, which is I'll play something on the guitar and then we'll listen to how the MIDI interpreted that and we'll see what that sounds like. So first the guitar. with the hexaphonic pickup translating my note information into data for a synthesizer and then playing that synthesizer with those notes. To be honest with you, that's kind of the problem with all of these MIDI processors is, you know, in our mind we think we're going to wail on guitar and then magically turn it into like this cool Moog synth sound and it's going to do all this and that and this, but it just doesn't really work that way. A better example would be something like Jump from Van Halen. So here's the guitar part. And if I just listen to what the guitar thinks I'm playing and turns that into MIDI data for a synthesizer, I can do this. And so we hear with Van Halen we get much better results, and that's because I got one finger with each string, right? And therein kind of lies the problem with some of the hexaphonic pickup processing. If I do this, you just know to interpret that as sort of like a rhythm that's built into your strumming, right? But when the hexaphonic pickup hears this, it doesn't know what that is. Where's that note on a piano? When they wrote the MIDI standard, they didn't really write anything for that. So instead what the hexaphonic pickup is going to do is it's going to start picking up maybe harmonic overtones that you might get and just sort of pulling something out of the hat and throwing that in there. Like, oh, he must be playing this note. Now the Jamstik software does have some smart features, and so you can actually set it to filter out those notes, but you're going to add latency because everything you play, it's going to then process and determine, oh, that's not a note that it's supposed to be playing. It's going to determine what it thinks you want to play. And what that's actually going to sound like is, instead of this, it's going to sound like this. So what I think the hexaphonic pickup is perfect for is studio work. And a lot of my musician friends that are guitarists that also mess around with MIDI guitars, even though it's not technically the right term, they agree, because a lot of us guitarists just pick up a guitar and we fiddle around, you know? And then you think, oh, that's a good idea. I want to write that down. And you'll sit there with a keyboard and you'll go, okay, that's this note and that's that note and that's that note and then this. No, I can just plug it into the synthesizer here, hit record, and it's going to start recording that data. And it's going to look a little funky, and then I'm going to go in there with a little digital pen tool and get rid of the off notes, and it's going to be a lot quicker than trying to write a song one key at a time. Another good thing that I think the hexaphonic pickup is really useful for is pads and things like that, as in this example here. So if I take that pad and then I start to bleed in some of the guitar sound that I have as well, it sounds like this. And that's where I think the Jamstik guitars are going to be great, is studio work that just helps you work faster. The Jamstik Studio is a cool little guitar, but it's not a great guitar. And I say that for not just the guitar functionality, but also the MIDI functionality. And those are a hand-in-hand situation. So the better you have your guitar set up, the better the hexaphonic pickup is going to be able to pick up the notes that you're playing more accurately. And the problem with the Jamstik Studio, at least for me, was I could never get it to intonate correctly. But when it comes to adjusting intonation, it's kind of a nightmare because you essentially have to take the string off, loosen each saddle, and each saddle is hand slid. There's no crank mechanism to precisely move it one way or another. So let's say you undo a string, loosen the saddle, and you slide it with your finger 1/16 of an inch, and then you tighten it back up. Sometimes the screw can actually pull something as it finally catches. Tune the string back up, play it, and it's off, and you got to go back and do it all again. And that's not so much different than a normal guitar, but on any other guitar, what you can do is you loosen the string, 2 turns on the tuner here, and you can actually adjust the intonation while everything's still attached and tighten it, and it saves so much time being able to do that. Another thing I'm not a big fan of is the string height adjustment, which is very important for playability of a guitar as well as how it interacts with all the pickups and can also help with intonation. I'm going to try and explain how this system works, and I'll get some video of it the best I can, but there's a lot crammed in there, so I'll try and also explain it with some visual aids here. Let's say you're the neck of the guitar and I'm the bridge, and this is what each string rests on. So it comes across here and it rests on this little roller and heads towards you, which would be the neck. By adjusting a screw right here, it rotates this. And when I loosen it, the tension pulls it down. And when I tighten it, it raises it up. And what I found happened is I tightened it up and the roller got to this point right here where it's perfectly on top and the string's still running across here from the bridge to the neck. And when I loosened it, because of the way it was sitting in there, it was just stuck. And that's not like a terrible thing, but you need to go in there with a little screwdriver and just nudge it till the tension of the string can pull it back down so it rests against this screw that's adjusting it. So a couple other things I didn't like about the Studio was the fact that there was no tone knob. I think that's kind of just silly. I also think that the fact that the wiring was a little reversed was a little silly as well. I don't really understand the purpose for that, or if there was a purpose, or if that was just a quality control thing. There's other things that are a little more superficial about it that I think you know when you buy it. Like the obvious thing is it has no headstock, so you're not going to be hanging it on a wall stand. You just have to be a little more careful with where you put it, right? But that's something you need to know before you go into buying that. I don't think you can blame that on the guitar itself. Now, something else I noticed as I was watching the video back was the way that the guitar sits in your person with where the straps are is I'm actually strumming it a lot right up here where the neck is. And that's obviously not going to give you the ideal sound. Now, both of these guitars, these are not great pickups by any means, and I'm going to definitely swap these pickups out for something a little bit more quality. I just need to figure out how much of a mess it's going to be once I pull off the pick guard here as well as this back cover and dig out the circuit board, and it's not going to do me any good if I put new pickups in it but I mess up the Midi functionality or something else, right? Anyway, guys, that's my video. I hope you liked it. If you did, please like it. Please subscribe. That also helps me make more content like this. If you have any questions, please leave them below in the comments, and I will see you next time.